everyone, welcome to this video about how to divide fractions. So I believe that everything in life, including math, is a lot easier when you love yourself. So I'd like you to take a moment and give yourself some pure love and some pure acceptance for where you are in your life right now. Even if you've got some tough things going on in your life, even if you feel like you're not perfect and maybe you mess up at things, by giving yourself acceptance for where you are right now, it makes it so that everything you do is coming from a place of acceptance, which makes things a lot easier. So give yourself a little bit of love, take 2 deep breaths, and let's make this math easy. All right, so when you're dividing fractions, you take the top number of your first fraction and you multiply that by the bottom number of your second fraction. And those two numbers multiplied together are going to give you the top number or the numerator of your answer. And then similarly, you take the bottom number of your first fraction, multiply that by the top number of your second fraction, and those two numbers multiplied together will give you the denominator or the bottom number of your answer. So there's two different methods you can use to remember this process for dividing fractions. When I learned how to divide fractions, my teacher taught me to multiply by the reciprocal, and she said to keep it, change it, and flip it. And so keep it basically means you keep the first fraction the same, so you have 2/5. Then you change it, which means you change the division sign to a multiplication sign, and then you flip or find the reciprocal of the second fraction. So the reciprocal of 3/4 would be 4/3. And then once you've changed it into a multiplication problem, you just multiply straight across. So you go 2 times 4 is 8, 5 times 3 is 15. And if you want to see how to multiply fractions and why that works that way, you can watch my video about multiplying fractions. But that's the method that I learned when I went to school. When I started teaching school, one of my students taught me the zigzag method, and I thought it was awesome. So I actually use the zigzag method now, even though it wasn't the way that I originally learned it. And the zigzag method basically says that you multiply in a zigzag pattern. So you take 2 and you multiply it by 4, which gives you 8. And that's the first part of the zigzag. Then you do 5 times 3 gives you 15, and that's the second part of the zigzag. And as you can see, you get the same answer either way. So it doesn't matter which method you use, and you can choose whichever one makes the most sense to you. I personally like the zigzag method because it makes it so I don't have to rewrite the problem with the reciprocal, but you can choose either way. And when you look at these two methods, you might wonder, why does it work this way? You know, like when we multiply fractions, we just multiply the numbers straight across the top and multiply the numbers straight across the bottom. Like, why can't we do that for division? Because multiplication and division are inverses of each other, and they usually work pretty similarly. And the answer to that is you actually could if the division worked out nicely. But unfortunately, a lot of the times the division doesn't work out nicely when you go straight across. Because like in this example, if you did 2 and you divided straight across, 2 divided by 3 is 0.666666666. And it goes on forever. It's an infinitely long decimal. And 5 divided by 4 would give you 1.25. And even though technically this fraction is equal to 8/15, it'd be really hard to be able to tell that it's equal to that. And it's not really in the form that we usually think of fractions being in, because you've got decimals in the numerator and denominator instead of having whole numbers. And so that's the reason we don't divide straight across, is because usually the division doesn't work out very nicely. But if you do happen to get a fraction or a set of fractions where it does divide nicely when you divide straight across, you're absolutely welcome to do that. But the reason why we multiply by the reciprocal or we use the zigzag method is because multiplying by the reciprocal gives us the exact same result as dividing by the original fraction. So in this example, if we did 2/5 divided by 2, that basically means that we have 2/5 and we're splitting it into 2 groups. And as you can see, each one of those 2 groups has 1/5 in it. And that gives us our answer of 1/5 when we just divide that visually. Because dividing by the number 2 is relatively easy. You just split it into 2 groups. But that's the same thing as multiplying by a half, because if you start off with a group of 2/5 and you find 1/2 of that group, then you still get the same answer because 1/2 of 2/5 is 1/5. And you can see that when you go 2 times 1, that gives you 2. 5 times 2 is 10. And that fraction reduced equals 1/5. And so that's the reason why dividing by a number is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal of that number. Because if you wrote 2 as a fraction, that would be 2 wholes or 2/1. And the reciprocal of that would be 1/2. So that's the reason why we can multiply by the reciprocal and why we use that pretty much all the time when we're dividing fractions, is so that we can avoid having decimals in our fractions like this, and we can have whole numbers instead by multiplying by that reciprocal. And this can be really useful when you have complex fractions. Like in this example, you have a fraction within a fraction, which can look really complicated when you first look at it. But if you remember that the fraction bar means division, you can rewrite this problem as 8/9 divided by 2/3. And then that makes it really easy because then I can just use the zigzag method and say 8 times 3 is 24. 9 times 2 is 18. And then I can reduce that fraction and possibly change it into a mixed number if I need to. So in this problem, I could reduce it because both the top and the bottom number can be divided by 6, which would give me 4/3, which is an improper fraction that I could also write as 1 1/3 if I wanted to. Usually I like leaving my answers as improper fractions, but it depends on what math program you're using and if your worksheet says to write it as an improper fraction or a mixed number. And if you want to know how to reduce fractions or how to convert to mixed numbers, you can watch my videos about that. But basically, this process of dividing fractions can be applied to lots of different types of situations, including dividing rational expressions. So this is a complicated problem that is covered in Algebra 2. And basically, it's the idea of dividing fractions that have polynomials in them. So if you want to check out my video about how that works, you're welcome to look at that. But the cool thing is that it still follows the same pattern of multiplying in a zigzag pattern or multiplying by the reciprocal. So to summarize, the way that we divide fractions is we multiply the top number of the first fraction by the bottom number of the second fraction to give us our top number. So like we did 1 times 5 is 5. 3 times 3 is 9, 2 times 2 gave us 4, 5 times 2 gave us 10, 3 times 4 gave us 12. And then we do the zigzag pattern in the other direction to give us our bottom number. So we go 3 times 2 is 6, 5 times 2 is 10, 9 times 1 is 9, 9 times 1 is 9 there as well, 7 times 2 is 14. And then once we've got our answers, then we can reduce the fractions if we need to. So like this one, for example, could be reduced to be 6/7. Or this one right here could be reduced to a mixed number and it could be 1 1/9. But it depends on whether or not your homework requires that or not. So when you're dividing fractions, you can use either one of these methods, either multiplying by the reciprocal or multiplying in a zigzag pattern, and you can just choose whichever one works best for you. I hope this video helped make dividing fractions easy for you. Let me know how easy it was for you by typing a number in the comments below, and then subscribe for more easy math videos. You may also want to check out my fractions playlist, and if you'd like more help with your math homework, you can go to mathtutoringonline.com to ask a question or book a one-on-one tutoring session. See you soon!